William Irvin Eisner was one of the earliest pioneers in the comic book industry, best known for his series The Spirit, which ran from 1940 to 1952. The Spirit was a major hit for its time. At its peak, The Spirit was syndicated in 20 American newspapers with a total circulation of 5 million copies. People loved this comic for its mix of crime drama, noir vibes, and mystery-filled stories. The Spirit and many other works by Eisner, like A Contract with God, made Eisner a household name. Alongside his help in the advancement of the comic book industry with introducing concepts like the graphic novel and aiding the next generation of cartoonists by teaching comic book courses at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Eisner achieved so much in the comic book industry, so many awards, accolades, and celebrations. One of the highest awards you can attain in the comic book industry is named the Eisners, after the cartoonist, which is the Oscars for the comic book industry. But there's something Eisner also did that was really distasteful. Enter Ebony White. Ebony White was the Spirit's sidekick who was designed in a racist, ugly manner that was a typical depiction of black people in the Jim Crow era. Eisner gave Ebony over-exaggerated pink lips and large eyes, something you would see in blackface. Eisner also gave Ebony a very country minstrel show pattern of speech. Eisner tried to justify the way he drew this character by pretty much saying this was a trend of the time, but even back then people understood this imagery of black people was wrong, but Will still decided to draw this character in this way. I've seen others defend this character by saying things like, well, he was treated with respect throughout the comics and had a purpose and was not just played for some joke. Again, this is just a cop-out because this racist caricature of this black boy character was wrong and had long-lasting implications. Remember, this comic was ran through 20 newspapers all over the United States. And millions of people may have seen this character and probably didn't even read the comic, but just saw his face and may have laughed. This face has been seen by millions of people and it was normalized. Pretty interesting that Eisner decided to create such a character that represented all the negative stereotypes of black people when he himself grew up fighting and was being bullied for his Jewish heritage. Imagine how these depictions made the black readers of these comics feel.
We would look at these other characters and sort of be ashamed because that's all we would see of ourselves. That was the representations that we had. There was nothing to aspire to.
After a while, you're saying, why isn't the hero African American?
Sadly, Eisner was not the only person who drew black people this way, nor was this comic the only one to do this.
I see jigaboos, I see styrofoams, my hood guns.
Now, in the early years of the comics industry, The Spirit, for example, I'm going to give some examples. Sunday newspaper supplement introduced the title character's black sidekick, the taxi driver Ebony White. Dell Comics, The New Funnies featured the antics of Little 8-Ball alongside Raggedy Ann and Andy. Jungle comics were another popular genre, very popular, and Captain Marvel's black valet and sidekick Steamboat was another fixture in this popular comic book series until 1945. And so in these moments, when I look at these images, I think about one of my favorite quotes by writer Charles Johnson, who's also a cartoonist, who cautions us. He says, "We should remember that the pictures we are looking at, these era images of blacks, are a testament to the failure of the imagination and often of empathy too, and tell us nothing about black people, but everything about what white audiences approved and felt comfortable with in pop culture until the 1950s.
Eisner and many other comic book artists' drawings of black characters most likely influenced many comic artists to come up after them, like a Robert Crumb, to also draw black characters in the same way, and may have influenced some of your favorite mangaka to do so as well. Robert Crumb is, in my opinion, one of the cringiest comic book artists to come out. A great artist, yes, but his ideas and stories are something a edgelord teen would create. When Crumb gets called out for his horrible depictions of not just black people, but of women and Jewish people as well, he justified by saying people just don't understand the message. Like, come on, man. Look at these pictures. This video isn't about shitting on Will Eisner, who's been dead for over 20 years. This video is about black superheroes. I wanted to talk about Ebony White to show this is where we started as black people in comics. How black characters in comics started out as lowly racist, blackface sidekicks to being some of the best-selling characters out, recognized and respected by so many people around the world.
African American, I'm African, I'm black as the moon, heritage of a small village, part of my residence, came from the
The black superhero paradox is the concept of what it is to be a superhero while being black. How these characters are supposed to be represented in ways that lean towards appreciation of black culture and not appropriation. The idea of balancing how to tackle issues related in the black community whilst not isolating other communities. Some ask, do we need to always use black heroes to touch on social issues? Others may also ask, why do we need to worry about these ideals of others when they never cared about our own? The paradox doesn't just apply to these characters, but those who create, write, or draw them. Doesn't matter if the creator or writer of these comics and characters are black or not. Do these creators need to compromise their vision again in order to appeal to the masses? I'm going to try and answer these questions and more in this video. Let's start with a bit of history. Mainstream comics like Marvel and DC didn't present real black superheroes till the 60s and 70s, with characters like Luke Cage, Black Lightning, and Black Panther being the most popular, all of which were created by white men. Luke Cage being created to take advantage of the blaxploitation movies of the 70s, Black Lightning created in order to compete with Marvel's Luke Cage. Both again were caricatures of black people with goofy outfits and speech patterns. Black Lightning being the origin of the black superheroes only having lightning powers trope, even though there are many black superheroes without those powers. Lastly, Black Panther being created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, both who stated their main reasons for creating the character being they wanted to see more black characters in their comics and had nothing to do with the civil rights movement of the time, nor is associated with the Black Panther Party that was beginning to gain popularity around the time as well. Black Panther technically being the actual first black superhero, his first appearance being in July 1996 in an issue of Fantastic Four. All three of these characters came and went, having comic series being announced and usually due to low sales being canceled. These characters are often featured in other teams' comics like the Avengers, Justice League of America, Fantastic Four, and such. I personally can't speak on how black fans felt about these characters at the time. I know many people did not connect with Black Panther because of his prince status, him being from Africa and the fantastical land of Wakanda, and the caricature nature of Cage and Black Lightning also didn't stick either because it didn't seem real.
In the beginning, I embraced it and I bought all of the issues, but I was finding it hard to read it. Some of the characters struck me as being stereotypical and sort of making fun.
I mean, I loved Luke Cage, and my cousins and I would sit down and we would read Luke Cage, and we would laugh, and we would go, nobody talks like this.
As time went on, these characters got their just due, with many of them being overhauled and rewritten with more depth and relatable factors added to them, starting with writers like Christopher Priest taking over Black Panther and turning the character into the character we know today. Later on in the early to mid 2000s, Reginald Hudlin took over Black Panther as well, and his run of Black Panther has been met with such high praise. Storm was also a popular prominent black character, being a staple of the X-Men comics. The problem in my eyes with these characters is that they were written through the lens of white writers, especially early on, so there was a real lack of connection to what it was like being black in this world during the time when these heroes were created. I personally don't think it is an issue for white writers to work on black characters, but there will be subtle nuances that can be overlooked or be lost when a white or non-black person writes these characters. Something as little as most of these characters having the same haircuts. Most white writers or artists who aren't deeply in community with black people wouldn't be able to, or maybe even care to think about those things like the differences between a taper fade, blast fade, or bald fade. And we saw this with all the aforementioned characters, with most of them having the same three haircuts.
These are common characters that you'll find in comic books in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, all the characters in the comic books, they look somewhat like this. Either they're bald with a goatee, bald with an eye missing, right? So the middle one there, that's Luke Cage, right? Or Rhodey, the War Machine in Iron Man. He looked like that in the comic books at one time. That's Nick Fury, of course, that we all see in the movies. But also there's a guy called Deathlock on Marvel. He has an eye missing. Cyborg on DC, he happens to have an eye missing and he happens to be bald, right? Oh, and it gets better. John Stewart, Green Lantern, the Black Green Lantern, he has a bowl cut. Sometimes in the comic books they get a little jazzy, put a little lightning bolt in there, right? And then what's really easy for illustrators to draw is a man with a ridiculously sized afro.
And now the new fan favorite, the dreadlock comb over. This is a overused hairstyle for black characters at this point. It was pretty much played out once Killmonger came out in Black Panther #1, so I don't know why it was used so much. Black women characters definitely don't get no love in the hairstyle department. Some white writers have written comics with the main characters being black, but the race of the character does not really come into play or matter in the series. For example, Mark Millar's comic Prodigy, the main character Edison Crane, who is just like a James Bond or a Bruce Wayne type of guy. He's a super genius, super rich, and is damn near perfect at everything that just happens to be black. Another example of this is when Bulletproof from Invincible takes over the mantle of said character and becomes the main character for a few issues. We get a great backstory of Bulletproof. Nothing about his race ever comes into play in that background though, and that's fine. Those are good comics, and I believe there's room for these types of stories. Jordan Peele also did this in his 2019 movie Us, where this family, the Wilsons, are tormented by evil clones of themselves called the Tethered. Again, a movie where the cast just happens to be black. There is a difference though with this movie compared to those comics, since it was written by Jordan Peele, who is a black man. Peele wrote and added subtle things to the movie that only a black writer would think about, like the dad character, Gabe Wilson. Throughout the film, he's wearing a Howard sweater, Howard being one of the most popular HBCUs around. He also wrote Gabe in a way that subverts the big black man stereotype, purposefully I might add. Gabe, played by Wilson Duke, a 6'5", probably 260, 280 black man, is someone in the film who comes off as dorkish and goofy. Spider-Verse movies are a perfect example of a non-black writer writing for a black character. This movie showed that Miles was a black or Afro-Latino character without overdoing it, showing his culture and who he was in a very subtle way. Either it was his fashion choices, the music he listens to, and even his bilingual greetings. Very appropriate, not feeding to stereotypes and not trying too hard to show his race, but also not completely ignoring it, making Miles into a real relatable character. Far from what comic book writer Yehudi Macario did, who wrote the 4th issue of the What If Miles Morales Was This Hero miniseries, where we see what if Miles was Thor, and this comic is straight up horrible. The narration is in raps. Miles calls Asgard his hood. Miles is also designed to look like Odell Beckham Jr., and it's just a straight up cringe fest of a comic. Mercado later apologized for a stereotypical depiction of this character after all the backlash he got from this comic. The editors of this story should also have been called out for letting this be pushed through and printed. I don't understand what their thought process was. This is where the importance of having black creators comes in. When black writers take control of these characters, things change. If you take a look at later installments of the previous characters I mentioned, like Luke Cage, Black Panther, and Black Lightning, once they got black writers, the tones of these comics began to shift and become more relatable and realistic. Luke Cage wasn't speaking like Dolomite anymore. Black Panther wasn't just fighting the Ku Klux Klan, but was having to deal with different types of oppression and microaggressions from some of the people he had to work with. This leads me to politics in comics. Black stories and characters are looked at as some sort of political statement, especially nowadays with this culture war going on. Any black character presented is received as some sort of forced diversity, when more times than not, it isn't.
But there is a hardcore piece of the audience whose back goes up whenever you go into these issues, and they don't even realize it. And what kills me about it is when they're writing about it, they're always hyper-rational. Look, the fact is there are more white characters, and if you picked randomly, you would end up with all white teams. And the fact that there are 3 black people on this team is statistically ridiculous. I mean, it's obviously a quota. And the quota arguments on fictional teams crack me up, because who's actually, I'm sorry, somebody losing a job here? Which fictional character is losing a job? There's no connection. You know, they're not talking about what's going on in the comic books. They're talking about what they think is going on in their lives, and that's not really going on either.
Fanboys always love pushing out the statement, I wish they would just leave politics out of comics. But comics have always been political. One of the main and most popular superheroes is Captain America, who is literally in his first issue fighting Nazis and punching Hitler in the face. This was a huge political statement, especially during this time of World War II. Superman's color scheme isn't by accident also. A lot of these superhero comics, especially back in the day, were pushing an agenda. Many people never saw an issue with this propaganda, at least from a consumer standpoint, because these things were not seen as political, just everyday happenings for them. That's because many of these comics were pushing things that already aligned with the viewpoints of these readers. Back in the 1990s, the publishing imprint Milestone Comics came out, and I already made a video covering this company, so go check it out. But to quickly summarize what Milestone was about, Milestone was a comic book company that was founded by Black comic book creators who wanted to diversify the market with more superheroes that looked like them with stories that were more relatable. Many characters came out from this imprint, most popularly Static, which many of you may know from the WB cartoon series Static Shock. The comics coming out from Milestone dealt with a lot of issues such as drug addiction, racism, teen sexuality, and teen pregnancy, as well as corporate theft of Black creations. One of my favorite series was Icon, who essentially is a Black Superman. Augustus Freeman is an alien who landed on Earth, who was founded by a slave woman. Augustus transforming into a baby once found and growing up as a Black person, but not with the ideals of a Black American. By the time the comic takes place, he's already lived on Earth for over 100 years and is pretty much a Uncle Tom or a Black conservative type. Augustus' views change once he meets Rachel Irving, a teenage girl who convinces Augustus to use his powers to help people while she becomes his sidekick, forming the team Icon and Rocket. At the end of issue 1 of Icon, Augustus tries to help authorities handle a bank robbery, landing in front of all the police to see if he can assist with the conflict, only to get the police to pull their guns and aim them at him and Rachel, with Rachel promptly saying, "But I bet this never happens to Superman." This is a story only a Black writer could tell. Dwayne McDuffie, the writer of Icon, I'm sure had to deal with racial profiling from police before. Again, many of the Milestone comics dealt with these kinds of themes. Even though these stories are powerful and necessary, these types of stories played a big part in the downfall of Milestone. Again, go check out my video where I covered the happenings of Milestone Media. Dwayne McDuffie had to deal with a lot of issues when it came to writing his own comics.
A writer that the reader knows is Black puts a lot of the mainstream, I say mainstream, I mean white readership on edge. I mean white male readership on edge. They're really looking for some proof that I'm trying to, the phrase I get all the time is I'm always trying to shove my agenda down their throat, which seems sexually charged to me. I don't know.
Milestone was ahead of his time with their stories and characters. These comics' legacy left an impact on many young readers, especially Black comic book fans. Good thing the company started when it did, because if the company would have came out today, it would have been deemed as woke or DEI comics. These two buzzwords have been turned from positive initiatives to something deemed as negative, forced progressive ideologies. Diversity, equality, and inclusion. I'm not sure how there's a problem with just accepting people for who they are, but conservative right-wing media and pundits have framed this as if minority groups are being handed things like jobs or opportunities that they don't deserve, as if they're getting the upper hand, when DEI is more about leveling out the playing field for everyone. And just so you know, DEI doesn't just help Black or queer people, this also helps disabled veterans, white women, and such. So I don't know what the issue is. I don't get it. The term woke is another Black phrase being stolen and misconstrued into something else. Going from a phrase Black people would say to each other, stating "stay woke," pretty much meant staying aware of what people, especially the government or media, is telling you. Do your own independent research. Don't take what they are saying at face value, because they could be lying or changing up the truth. Now wokeness is also equated to some negative progressive propaganda. People viewing any movie, show, book, or piece of media that is not led by a straight white man as woke. This precedence has affected how many Black creators are making comics nowadays, whether they like to admit it or not. W.E.B. Du Bois famously created this concept of the double consciousness, describing the psychological experience of marginalized individuals, particularly particularly Black Americans, who must consistently view themselves through the lens of a dominant, often racist society, leading to a fragmented sense of self. And I believe that the belittling or dismissal of Black art and stories plays a role into this. Equating diversity into something negative will often leave Black creatives in a sore spot. Black creators either lean into their diverse ideals while others completely try to avoid it. Some overtly try to oppose these ideas, as is the case with YouTuber Eric July. July created his comic book company under the guise of being non-woke comics and made millions of dollars off of it. And if you don't know who Eric July is, this is pretty much his whole gimmick, being anti-woke and tokenism, but it seems to be all being bad faith. Just stating that you are not going to put politics in your comics is a political statement in itself. Quick little tangent, I think the Eric July thing is funny because when he started publishing comics, he aligned himself with the borderline alt-right comics group Comicsgate, but was quickly barred from the group once he started becoming more successful than the people in the group, mainly the leader Ethan Van Sciver. He wasn't just kicked out of the group, but was blatantly disrespected, not just online, but in real life, with Comic-Gate's fans and supporters literally showing up to Eric July's great-grandfather's gravesite to take selfies in front of it. July's great-grandfather was the inspiration for July's flagship character Isom, but that's what happens when you align yourself with hate groups who only accept you because you're pushing their narrative, though July never really changed his political beliefs. Anyways, this is where the paradox comes in. When we tell our stories, they're often labeled as woke or race baiting. It's like we can't win. If we create new Black characters or tell stories about our struggles, it's labeled as too much, but if we don't, we're also told we're not doing enough. Fans claim they want original Black characters but never support them. They'd rather complain about race swapping than pick up a comic with a Black superhero as the lead. Fans also like to do this mental gymnastics when it comes to the changing of mantles of characters. When Captain America is changed from Steve Rogers to the Falcon, it's a problem, but when Wally West takes over the mantle of the Flash, it's all good. I wonder why. They don't want us to tell their stories unless it's to make everyone, meaning white audiences, feel comfortable. And they don't want Black heroes to be the lead. They'd rather us be the stereotypical sidekick. But I say, fuck that. It's important for Black creators and characters to get their just due. Tell the stories that are necessary. No, not every story has to be about our Blackness or the oppression we've received as a race. I love a great escapist story like anyone else, but we shouldn't feel the need to compromise our voices to appease everyone. We should also be the ones telling our own authentic stories and history, especially with the government nowadays trying to ban certain parts of history. It is way more important to not let them nerf our Black heroes or dumb down what really was happening or going on in this country. Look at what they did to Martin Luther King. They minimalized the doctor to one speech just to fit the narrative that they were trying to push. Think about how many Black activists and Black leaders of the past that we never learned about in school. They say go woke, go broke, but I think that's bullshit. There are many comics that have been very successful that have diverse cast and dealt with political issues. Bitterroot. Bitterroot is an American comic book series created by Sanford Green, Chuck Brown, and David F. Walker. Published by Image Comics, Bitterroot is a horror action series set in 1924 Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance. The graphic novel written by David F. Walker and Chuck Brown follows the Singri family, a line of monster hunters who use science and mysticism to cure rather than kill the creatures they track. The monsters known as the Janoon are created from what happens when you are overtaken by hatred and prejudice.
Bitterroot is about the Sangrier family. They are a family of monster hunters set against the backdrop of the Harlem Renaissance. But the thing is that monsters in this world are people who have been infected by a disease. That disease is hatred, racism, intolerance, oppression. And the Sangrier family specializes mostly in curing them, but there's a faction of the family that believes we should just kill them.
It's almost kind of a Malcolm Martin scenario.
This comic is Black from the first page to the last. All the creators, the main cast of characters, and even the subject matter. Let me not forget the amazing movie poster reference variant covers that were coming out during the first run of the series. Look at these are amazing. This comic cuts deep with not only the analogy of racism and prejudice turning people into literal monsters, but also those whose souls are tortured by pain and grief of loss. These horrible feelings turning these people into a different type of monster. The Inzondo. This story does a great job of creating and developing each character, adding real-life historical tragedies to this story like the Tulsa Massacre to develop certain characters, but also reinforce how racism is in the United States, how someone who may have lived through these horrid events may end up. Even with its steampunk and sci-fi elements, the story really hits on key real-life issues, not only things that Black people go through, but all kinds of marginalized groups. This comic really shows what happens when Black creators make Black stories freely with no holds barred. Walker, Green, and Brown didn't have the vision to please any type of audience. They created a comic that was true to them. These creators put Black characters in a genre they are rarely the main characters in, with the steampunk sci-fi story, but still keeping it real with their messaging in the comic. Bitterroot is a successful series with critical high praise, selling fairly well, even got a movie option for the comic. They also have a sequel series that just came out. The next series of this comic is based in the 60s. Bitterroot also won 2 Eisners, one in 2020 and another one in 2022, which is pretty ironic. Black creators and Black comics have been put in the box, but over the years has been slowly being broken. Main characters like Miles Morales and Black Panther are doing gangbusters at the box office. Black indie comics like Stranger Comics are doing big time numbers on Kickstarter. So many new creators that are coming up, I just want to say, tell your story. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are or the stories you want to tell. I know that I'm doing that with my own comics. Black superheroes and Black characters in comics are also important because they reflect the complexities of our lives. They show that we're not just one thing and that we deserve to see ourselves as heroes in all kinds of stories. So let's keep pushing for authentic representation. No more stereotypes, no more compromises. These Black superheroes also show little Black kids who they can be, seeing themselves in something that's fantastical and amazing. Many of these Black comic creators barely had Black icons to look up to as inspiration. Myself, only being 27 at the time of the recording, grew up in the 2000s and the 2010s, and I had little positive representation in the mainstream medias, let alone comics. Now, being a comic book creator myself, I don't see myself creating a comic or story where the main character isn't Black. Even at a very young age, I always knew I wanted to create stories where I could put myself in. Lastly, if you think that this topic is just woke nonsense, maybe it's time for you to open your eyes and to see there's much more to it. And if you don't want to, you can suck my Obviously, I'm not the end-all be-all when it comes to this subject matter. This topic is pretty heavy-handed, and I've probably merely just scratched the surface of like the topics of race, politics, and like all this cultural stuff when it comes to comics. Obviously, Black people are not the only people in comics who have been subject to like prejudice and racial depictions and just straight-up derogatory imagery. I'm only speaking from my perspective because I am a Black man and I can only speak from there. I don't want to speak for, other races, people of other sexual orientations and such. It was just a topic that's been on my mind since I started getting back in there, being a comic book fan, really. Honestly baffled by how conservative, I guess you could say, or right-leaning, alt-right some of these fan groups can get. I mean, it's really bizarre and weird. So as time's gone on and I've heard the random arguments from people online and their cultural or discourse, it just kind of bugged me. So I just wanted to add my somewhat 2 cents in there. I do deep thought analysis on comic books on this channel. That's kind of the whole point. That's what makes comics such a great medium, because you can read the comics and also find little bits and pieces and delve deep in them. At least that's how I view the medium and how I read my comics. I don't just read them for the surface level like viewing points. I read them to see what I can get out of them and things of that nature, right? And I try to put that in my own writing and my own drawings when I make my own comic books. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching this video today, and this is kind of a longer video than I'm usually doing. We'll see. I might come back to this subject matter later as I do more research and dive deeper into this history. I mean, hell, like I only talked about mainstream comics. I didn't even get to like underground comics or even like the old time like comic strips, which were like way worse than like anything that came after that. So we'll see. Like again, appreciate you guys for watching this video to the end. I am a comic book creator myself. You can check out my comics on my website. The link is in the description. I'm also going to put in the description a bunch of other Black indie comic creators you can follow and check out. A lot of good work out there. So if you don't know, I will highly recommend checking them out. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.